Hello and welcome again, everyone, to the Pennsylvania High School Football Report podcast. I'm Brian Linder from PennLive, here with Dan Sostek. Dan, big former high school football player from Pennsylvania in the news this week, Dan. Dwayne Johnson. Did you know he played high school football in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I do. I actually watched the his segment on the college game day where him and Dion were chatting it up, talking recruiting visits. I think he gave some recruiting stories from his days, but yeah, he's a PA boy.
Dan, The Rock has come back to the WWE. He may be wrestling at WrestleMania next year, Philadelphia. What do you think about that?
Here's my opinion.
It doesn't matter what you think about that, Dan.
I saw some UFC fighter do that in a post fight interview. I had no idea what it was, so I learned what it was. And let me just tell you, if The Rock's back in the WWE, and that means he's making less of his awful movies, so I'm not a big fan of his.
Oh man, Dan, you just gotta
I
have
love I love the Fast and the Furious, but he's kind of done the same thing for 10 years now.
Dan, this is the weekly segment where Dan comes on and kills a former Pennsylvania high school football legend and just puts them out of their misery.
Yeah. Hey, The Rock's from what I've seen, he's the best wrestler ever, or whatever. But his shtick on this in movies it's a little old. I'm happy to see him take a break. I could use a break from his kind of.
He lifts weights. He eats steaks. He's The Rock.
He could beat me up. That's for sure.
Yeah, there you go. He's like 50-something years old. You know, he looks incredible.
He also told us he gave some weird story about his Pitt recruiting visit too on game day, and said he couldn't go into further details. So
all the pro wrestling marks are upset because they feel like he's going to take Cody Rhodes' spot at WrestleMania. I know you don't watch much wrestling. I really don't either. I just kind of keep up with it because people read about it a lot on PennLive, surprisingly. But I was a little bit of a mark myself when The Rock was coming through, when I was in high school and they had The Rock and NWO over in WCW and stuff like that. So I'm all about it.
Had to be there type thing.
I'm all about it. I'll watch The Rock wrestle Roman Reigns again.
Yeah, I mean, two former Division I ACC football players. So
there you go. There you go. Anyway, that's a little bit off the beaten path, but hey, maybe next April in Philadelphia, you might get one final go round from Dwayne Johnson in the ring, which will be kind of interesting. But speaking of kind of interesting, we've had a big week of high school football again, and as crazy as it sounds, Dan, we're really, with tonight's games, you're going out to a few. We're filming this on a Thursday, and then next week, Friday's games, Thursday and Friday, we're at the midway point. And it has just flown by, I think, quicker than any season I've been a part of. We're getting ready. We're actually talking about, at PennLive, one of the things we do that's really popular is before the season, we do like a preseason projection, just like any, other thing. We do like a preseason All-American in college football and stuff like that. We do a preseason All-Mid-Penn team, a preseason All-PA team. We come back at the midseason, sort of reevaluate it, and then we go for, obviously the end of the year team carries the most weight. But now, looking at the midway season, Dan, we're getting ready to pick out like our Mid-Penn All-Stars for the midseason, guys who really led the pack. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit and sort of see where we're at with that. I mean, anybody jumping off, I tell you, one of the toughest ones, again, we talked about it before the season, Dan. I think quarterback's an incredibly difficult one to pick right now. I think Stone Saunders is out there. Alex Irby's getting ready to break a state record for passing yardage, right?
And then we've got some of the statistical guys, like Drew Brandstetter, who's just, he's not facing the competition those guys are facing, but you play who's on the schedule, and we evaluate how you play based on the schedule. And Drew Brandstedter's been doing it for about a year and a half almost now. So you can say what you will about Camp Hill playing an easier schedule than some of these other teams, but he's doing what he's putting up numbers for a solid year and a half now.
I mean, you look at the Mid-Penn, and right now Drew is second in passing yardage, which we have Alex Irby first. 1,274. Branstadter second, 1,148. Kentucky commit Stone Saunders, Bishop McDevitt is third, 1,132. But there's some guys on this list, like a Marcus Quaker is down the list actually a little bit, but he's still his value to his team. That's one where his value to his team, I think we have to weigh in especially when it
He
comes
might
to
be
the
high
end of
on
the
the
year.
rushing. He might be among the rushing yard leaders. Honestly, he had 140 against Trinity.
He's a tougher one to evaluate because you can't just do it off stats, I don't think.
No.
But then you got a guy like Keith Oates, who's surprisingly, I think, to a lot of people, fourth because he wasn't like some big time. He played quarterback last year for East Pennsboro. He wasn't some kind of big time passer, but I even wrote it in the write up this week. Is the amazing thing to me about Keith Oates, and I know you guys talked about him some before too, is he's got 932 passing yards, but not only is he going out every game and throwing for like 200, 300 yards, he's getting like 9-10 tackles. Playing linebacker. You don't see many. Dan, do you remember many varsity starting quarterbacks also starting at linebacker and leading their team in tackles?
Not many. No, I mean the thing about Keith Oates too is it's almost like an NFL team to a degree where you're playing quarterback and you don't have any, and your receivers are kind of limiting everything, and then you the next year you draft a wide receiver or something, they come in and they change kind of how you play quarterback. Keith Oates getting Trey Good back has really, really helped him because now you have Trey Good and Brecken Swope, who we've talked about a little bit. Brecken Swope's one of the best athletes probably in the Mid-Penn. He's a top tier pole vaulter in the state. So he has that on the one. So he's more of a big play threat. And Trey Good's just been a beast so far this year too. If you can surround these guys with kind of weapons like that, it's gonna kind of let them put their best ball out. Because I mean, John Denniston, he was one of our picks for one of our best coaches of the year so far this year, and it was something he talked about. Where last year they weren't healthy, and you kind of roll your eyes at it because it's like every coach kind of says that. But he was saying, I'm not making excuses. I think we have a really good football team if we stay healthy, and specifically cited Trey Good. Getting Trey Good back has really helped them. And we said on Tuesday, they could. I mean, they've got one of their tougher games maybe of the year, of the remaining of the year this year in Greencastle, but they could very well go unbeaten in the regular season now because of the job Keith Oates is doing on both sides of the ball.
If they get by Greencastle, I think they could do it, dude. I mean, and that's going to be interesting.
Raise your hand if you have a ticket that East Pennsboro go 10-0 this year.
Who saw that? Yeah, nobody saw that. We admittedly didn't see that. I think Dennison's
reminds me a little of Mechanicsburg a few years ago.
It's not like they've been like front runners since he's been there, but I think he's probably done an underrated job considering like overall, and it's no knock against the kids because I think they played as hard as they can play. But in terms of like the athletes they have at East Pennsboro, I think he's probably maximized their talent out a lot of the seasons they've had. So he's probably done an underrated job there. But Keith Oates he's a throwback old ball player. Quarterback is going to be tough for us to pick for mid-season and the way it's shaping up end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, even just and then we haven't even discussed player of the year so far and things like that. Like you kind of wonder, it's like, do you go with one of the quarterbacks? Do you go with a guy like Rico Scott, who has maybe been the most impressive guy in the conference? Do you go with one of the top tier defensive players that we've had? There's a lot of options at player of the year as a whole that it kind of almost makes that log jam at quarterback. You kind of wonder if that makes them split the votes, and the wide receiver like Rico Scott stands out a little more.
I still think your front runners, if you talk about offensive player of the year or just player of the year in general, are probably Alex Irby and Stone Saunders. They've had some blowouts in the first half. Now, Stone's had some tougher games. He's played some tougher opponents, I think, than Bishop McDevitt has in the past through the first couple games. And they've kind of come together because they had some questions to answer, like up front and stuff like that. I think he and Alex are going to put up numbers down the stretch. I expect both of those teams to be in the mix for state titles. So I think they might have an edge. Rico Scott, like you said, is right there with him. He's got 27 catches, 515 yards, 8 touchdowns. It's the Bishop McDevitt receiver who's a commit, Alabama commit.
Messiah Mickens.
Messiah Mickens. We'll have to see how the injury is. He was rolling along looking like maybe the best back in the state and wasn't quite the same. You saw him last week against West Perry. They lost to West Perry, and he obviously is a little dinged up. So we'll have to see that. We talked about quarterbacks, how tough it is here at the midway point of the season. We mentioned Rico Scott. He's in the mix of what is a really competitive, on paper, statistically, in the Mid-Penn wide receiver group, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Carson Schwartz at Carlisle's averaging over 30 yards a catch, and I think you mentioned Trey Good. He's up there in the high 22, I think, per catch.
15 for 410 and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah,
So.
and then in between those guys, you got guys like Jasper Sheps, who's got, a really underrated kid probably, who doesn't play for the biggest school in the Mid-Penn, Juniata, but he has 32 catches for 618 yards, 6 touchdowns.
And he had a big game against West Perry too, which I think kind of tells you, given West Perry holds a team like Trinity to 17 points and just under 100 yards passing, and Sheps showed out in that game. I think that kind of tells you that it's not just one of those things where he's putting up numbers against bad teams. He's a legitimate good player.
He's a two-way guy too. He had like 7 interceptions last year.
Yeah.
I think he's got a couple this year.
Yeah.
Darrell Caesar's on this list. He's third in the Mid-Penn right now in receptions. You guys don't know him. He didn't get to play in the state title game last year for Steel High because he got ejected going into it. But he had 66 catches for over 1,000 yards last year. He's at 26 and 517 right now. I fully expect him to have some big numbers down the stretch as Steel High goes for this thing. Ty Salazar is a guy that I know you guys are really big on, that you've seen him in person. I know he keeps putting up kind of ridiculous stat lines as a two-way guy too. And then Lex Cyrus is there. He's maybe the fastest guy in the state from Susquehanna Township, with 19 catches for 440 yards. So it's a really good receiver group.
And how about maybe the best pure red zone target so far this year has been Angel Roberts and Milner. He's got 8 of his 21 catches are touchdowns. For 321 yards and 8 touchdowns. Those are like tight end numbers, but I think that's more based on the role he serves, because the game I covered last week, Muhammad Karoma had 16 catches for 200 yards and no touchdowns, and Angel Roberts had 4. Asked them if they're kind of jealous of each other's stat lines, and they both just laughed and said, "No, we're both happy with each other." But those are some other kids.
Karoma has 30 catches. He's a college player. John Perry's in there from Steel High, who was kind of like the standout for them for the state title game. Derek Guzman from Hershey. They don't run the ball much. They don't throw the ball much. They run it a lot with Angel Cabrera. And when they do throw it, though, he's got 14 catches, 371 yards. That's like 27 yards a catch. So we have some home run hitters there. You got Ian Goodlings down there, who's super busy. Drew Gibney's put up some big games catching passes from his brother.
Yeah, Ian Goodling made maybe the best catch I've seen in a while. Especially given the circumstances, the catch basically won West Perry the football game, because they would have been 3rd and 14, throwing 2 if he didn't make this sort of Julian Edelman against the Falcons type catch in triple coverage. But yeah, he's another guy that, I was shocked. I was talking with someone the other day. We're entering our second year of podcast where we're just saying, how does this kid not have a single offer? He's a good football player, and he's had another good year.
He can at least kick, man. He's got he's got the boot, and then you get an athletic kicker who can do some things in an emergency situation. Yeah. So running back, I think, is also interesting here in the Mid-Penn Conference, Dan. Messiah Mickens is the front runner, and a guy that we all expected to be out there, but like we said, he's banged up. Then after him, you got a whole bunch of guys, like Deacon Schaefer, Connor Green. A lot of people probably, I bet if you ask people who the second leading rusher in the Mid-Penn was, you wouldn't get a lot of people.
You might not even get people getting the correct big spring running back.
Yeah,
you might have them guessing Grant Hall instead of.
Yeah, because they do so much with Grant. They spread him out. I think they throw in the ball a lot. But Connor Green's got 489 yards. He's
who sticks out to me on the running back list, though, and it's a team that I'll be covering tonight, and he doesn't have the most standout numbers in the world, but I'll tell you who I take on my football team any day of the week, and I think he's still having a great year given the circumstances, Cole Bartram. Because you look at the carry numbers on our leaderboard, he's the only guy in triple digits. He has 107 carries this year for 533. Still averaging 5 yards carry, and every team Northern goes against knows what they're doing every play. And this kid is as tough as they come. He's an elite wrestler too. We've kind of waxed poetic about him for a lot, but he's one of those. He's just one of those dudes that I think even if Northern's not going to be vying for another district playoff run or whatever, he's going to be a guy he's going to come out of there with something every single game. So I always think those guys that might not be putting up the numbers but have the context behind them of why their numbers are impressive are important too.
He and credit to Bill Miller, because Northern's had a tough year, and Bill sends in his stats every Friday night, and even when they take in a couple on the chin. So shout out to Mill Dog, and Cole Bartram. Yeah, it's not just running the ball. They loaded up. It's the Bartram train this year. They're going to feed him, but on defense, every week it's double digit tackle. I think 19 tackles and 130 rushing yards last week, and they scored 6 points and lost 12-6. So
yeah,
he's tough. You're right. There's a bunch of names on here though that you just. Deacon Schaefer had a really good year for Mifflin County. I think he's underrated. He's quick. He's fast. He's up there near the top of that Mid-Penn rushing list. How about this Brian Mosley kid? I don't think any of us really know much about him because he's all the way up in Altoona, but he's averaging almost 8 yards a carry. He's had a really good season. I think Brian Mosley's a pretty awesome sounding name for a running back.
He's been really good defensively too. He's all over the defensive leaderboards as well.
So he's a guy I got to pull up his film. I think we probably all do. Because again, Altoona is a clip. To be in the Mid-Penn, they're about 3 hours away from everybody in the Mid-Penn. It feels like you drive forever to go up there. But I definitely need to take a look at his film. Preston Burnett's a kid who, as we're putting in stuff on Friday nights, Dan, I sit up here and I watch all the high school football shows and all the film that comes in that I can find, and scour Twitter too. And Gettysburg's having a rough season, but it seems like every week he's got some kind of crazy run where he runs over 3 kids and scores a touchdown out at Gettysburg.
Matt Heiser was really high on him to start the year. They expected big things from him, and
every week,
especially replacing Johnson back there, who was, I believe, either first or second in rushing last year in the Mid-Penn. So
every week he's up there. So offensive lineman, that's one where I'm really going to have to dig into that over the weekend as we get into this midseason stuff. It's not easy to pick offensive linemen because everything happens in between, those tackle boxes for the most part. Unless they're pulling out and getting in front of a run and stuff. And it's hard to like grade all that. So you got to go back and you got to watch some film. You got to talk to some coaches and kind of see how kids are standing up. So that's usually the toughest part of any of these things.
Yep.
I think picking, because statistically there's statistics for everything, and then you look at the statistics, you talk to the coaches, you look at the film. If it all matches up, well, you got your first team running back or your first team wide receiver. Offensive line, a little more difficult. So that'll be a test. But Dan, right now, mid-season, cast one vote. I tell you what, 3 players, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 quarterback, you think has to be on our first team when we put it out next week for mid-season All-Stars.
All right. Well,
on the spot. Let's go. Come on. Fire off.
I have to go Stone Saunders because of the schedule. I think that they've played the toughest schedule of any of these guys. I think East Steel High's played a pretty tough schedule, but I mean, Bishop McDevitt starting the year 3-0 with the competition they faced, and Stone kind of, facing adversity head on, which they said, I think Stone said he hadn't won he told me he had not won a high school football game where they were losing at any point in his career, I think. So, or something along those lines, but they won 3 of them, I believe. So, and Stone was pretty much flawless in all those games. I think he's kind of taken the next step. The one thing I was excited about him this year was seeing if he could, make more plays outside of the pocket, kind of roll out, kind of make more improvisational plays. So I'm going to go Stone at quarterback. At running back, I'm trying not to be boring here, but it's hard right now to not go Messiah Mickens, even with the injury. He's been the best player I've seen. Probably, just no one can stop this kid when he's healthy. Especially because you see the growth from year 1 to year 2, and you just wonder what year 3 is going to be like, because he still feels like he has some room to grow. He's still going to get stronger and get faster. Averaging 12 yards a carry. you give him the ball, it's a first down. I think that's an easy pick. And you know what? I'm not going to go Rico Scott just because I don't want to be boring. So give me Jasper Sheps. Let's go small school. I'm giving him some love.
The receiver, I think, is the most interesting one. I think, and again, we're going to sit down and look at it. There'll be 3 receivers on that first team. I think Carson Swartz has to make it, and I'll tell you why. As a receiver, Carlisle, no knock against them. This was a rebuilding year. New coach Brandon Cook coming in. They don't have a lot. Okay, they don't have a lot on offense. They don't have a lot on defense. And Carson Swartz is kind of like the guy. He's not a big dude either. People know when you play Carlisle, you got to kind of stop Carson Swartz. And he's got 21 catches for 650 yards and 6 touchdowns. So, he's put up some huge numbers, kind of being like the only real threat right now in that offense. So, and we got obvious ones out there. Again, Rico Scott, I think, is pretty obvious. Darrell Caesar, I think, is probably in that mix. Jasper Shep.
You can make the case for Chase Reagan, too.
Chase Reagan's been there. Trey Good. Again, Derek Guzman. I think, we'll probably do 2 teams on our midseason All-Stars. We usually do 3 at the end of the year, so we'll see there. I agree on the side.
We haven't even mentioned Elias Koch either, and his stats are kind of off because of the Mannheim game, which I was told. I had heard that he was maybe a little sick for that game, which you don't want to make excuses for him, but I think a guy's not. Elias Koch isn't feeling well if he has 0 catches for 0 yards.
I think too, some of like the way the games have turned out have sort of dictated that, like, they didn't need to throw him the ball a ton against York. They didn't need to throw him the ball a ton against Carlisle. So I think that's kind of like an ace in the hole for Harrisburg going down the stretch. Like, we know now that they got, and it's again why I'm so excited about that young team, and we're kind of going down a different rabbit hole to kind of what we were just talking about. But I still remain I watched Manheim Township play Spring Ford last week. It's very high on Spring Ford. Matt Zoller's put up like 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's an excellent quarterback. Hayden Johnson would be, if we were going to talk all PA, we won't get into that in this podcast because we'll probably do an all PA mid-season team too, since we do a preseason one at the end of the year when we've been doing that. The end of the year one now, I think 6 years.
Yeah, Mannheim might be the best team I've seen play.
Hayden Johnson is in the argument for that top quarterback in the state.
If you're just going on film and ignoring all the recruiting stars and everything and watch how they play football, he's been pretty much perfect so far to start the year.
Mannheim has a very good offensive line. They have a couple receivers who can make plays. Landon Kennel, who's a Monmouth commit. But, watching him at Spring Forward, one of the things that impressed me, you don't often see it with high school quarterbacks, even really good ones. Hayden Johnson, who's a Lehigh commit, he hung in the pocket and delivered a couple times while getting hit. Okay.
Yeah.
And most high school kids, if they're getting hit and stuff, they don't adjust as well. They don't show that. They don't stand in there and deliver a dart. He did that a couple times. So I'm really, really impressed with him. And they beat Spring Ford, which again, I think Spring Ford is a really good football team. They beat like 63-28. Okay. Or something like that. Spring Ford put up some points, but they just could not keep pace with that good offensive line to run game. And when you got a quarterback who's just so efficient, like Lehigh could be getting a steal with Hayden Johnson because, again, just the toughness, the grit, the efficiency, the accuracy. There are a lot of intangibles there that I like about him. And I think, again, you talk about the top quarterbacks in the state, Samaj Beals out at Roman Catholic, Alex Irby at Steel High, Stone Saunders at Bishop McDevitt, Samaj Jones at St. Joe's Prep. And then there's Hayden Johnson. I think Peyton Wayner out at I'm sure I'm pronouncing his last name wrong all the time. At Central Catholic is an excellent football player. Julian Duggar, Penn Hills, going to your Pitt Panthers. Excellent football player. But Hayden Johnson is a guy who's probably been overlooked in all of this mix. Who shouldn't be.
I have a feeling he won't be as the play because I think that team's gonna make it deeper. I have a feeling. I mean, the only thing that gives you a little pause to me is, frankly, if this is a repeat of last year where Harrisburg kind of figures everything out and then they beat them in the playoffs. But this Manheim team feels really complete to me.
We've gone down a completely different rabbit hole, but yeah, I mean that's what Harrisburg has been good at for over half a decade now, adapting and growing through a season.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm really excited about them, because I see all the young guys they have. And like I said, the fact that Elias Koch really doesn't have big numbers yet, I feel like he probably could have big numbers, right?
Yeah.
But they just the game script hasn't necessarily worked out where they need him to have big numbers yet. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about that, to go with those young running backs, to go with that offensive line, even though they got beat up against Manheim Township. I think a lot of people are going to get beat up against them. I'm very excited to see where Harrisburg goes. Everybody's acting like Central Dolphins is a surprise. And again, we're way down the rabbit hole and kind of off chart here. I just want to point out that I said in the preseason I thought they were going to be pretty good because of the offensive line. But you know what? And I brought up Keyron Plummer. He's been a little bit better, and I thought he might be. Mateo Crummel, like you were texting me from the first game, like this guy can go. They play State College this week, so that's going to be really exciting to see. So anyway, Dan, you took me down a rabbit hole here, but I think 6A is going to be interesting because I think at the beginning of the year, we all thought St. Joe's Prep was untouchable. I'm not so sure that Manheim Township can't put up a little bit of a fight with them. If they get there, Pittsburgh Central Catholic is very intriguing to me. So I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean 6A, you kind of almost wish you could merge two of these schools together and see if they could put up a fighting chance against St. Joe's Prep.
We might have some schools that can go in there and battle them. We'll see. But we went way down a rabbit hole. You do defensive stats.
Yeah.
Mid-Penn wise, again, as we come up on the midpoint, let's talk about some guys who've been jumping off the page. Guys you think will probably be locks for our all-star team mid-season when we pick it out here.
All right, here's an underrated guy, because I've talked a lot about guys like Eugene Green and Jet Franz. I feel like those guys are been Ryan Epps recently for Harrisburg. They've been some of the best defense linemen in the state. I'm going to go with the guy Nathan Lusk on Cedar Cliff. Guy's the only guy in the conference, I believe, with multiple sacks and multiple interceptions. 3 sacks, 3 interceptions. Kid's also a really good tight end for a Cedar Cliff team that is unbeaten and has looked pretty good. And we mentioned on our last pod that Colin Gillen just, once again, just doing a fantastic job with a program that probably doesn't have the talent some of these other programs that have been as successful as them do, but just keeps grinding away. And Nathan Lusk has been, to me, kind of the leader of that group, kind of anchoring a defense that it's a team that wins with defense. So he's been a guy that really has stuck out to me. We mentioned Cole Bartram. He's just been, doing everything for that team. And then if we go back to Bishop McDevitt, Ty Kephart's just kind of just quietly filled in nicely. They lost a couple linebackers last year. Ty Kephart made some big plays last year. He's one of the leading tacklers. I think he's been really good this year. And then Jacob Ness in Trinity. Jacob Ness does it all for that defensive unit that's been really, really good. So those are some guys that I think are going to probably find their way onto the all-star teams.
Jet was my preseason pick for leaders leading the conference in sacks, and he's up there. Ryan Epps and Eugene Green, like you said, all 3 of those guys got 6 sacks right now. So Ryan Epps obviously from Harrisburg, Eugene Green from Steel High. So interesting to see those guys. You talked about Nate Lusk. He's another guy that's sort of like Keith Oates. He comes in on Friday nights. When you look down the box score, you see one of the leaders in tackles on the team. A lot of the times you see, he's had a knack for picking off passes.
Yeah.
A knack for scoring touchdowns on offense. He's doing a little bit of everything for the Colts. So, I think he's got to be on there somewhere, right? And then again, Ty Salazar, that's where he sort of fits in.
A sneaky guy, Zachary Mell on Big Spring too. He's had a really good year.
He's a college prospect. He's like 6'4", 225, 230. There's some other guys on here. Michael Gall, is on this tackle list. He had a big year in tackles last year
And
for State
State
College.
College's stats are all kind of off too because they missed a game because of Altoona, so
Yeah.
it's hard to compare them statistically. But he's a really good player.
He's one of the better linebackers. I'm glad you brought up Jacob Ness. He's consistent for Trinity. Tucker Painter's had a pretty good year for them. He's a little bit more of a thumper, I think.
You know who's one of the most fun, one of the most fun guys to watch in the conference, and it's going to be fun for the next couple of years. Is Quincy Brandon on Harrisburg? That kid plays. You know, he reminds me a lot of he's of Trayvon Diggs a little bit on the Dallas Cowboys. Ironically enough, with a certain other Harrisburg grad on that team. I wonder
is it because he went for that Landon Kennel?
Yeah, I mean,
Trayvon to go for it.
Yeah, I mean he goes for it, and when he gets it, because he's a really explosive player. He's a really smart player too. It feels like he kind of knows when to take those risks. But he is a pure ball hawk. He only has 2 picks this year, but I think it's because they face some teams that can't really get the ball off against their pass rush. I expect him to be among the leaders in interceptions this year, and he's probably gonna I think develop into a college level prospect too for sure.
So we got some fun decisions to make. Obviously, this Friday will factor into it. Some guys may push themselves over the top. Some guys may not. Before we actually move on, want to give a shout out. We got to request an email for a shout out. So we'll give a shout out. Caden and Brody Pines, Cumberland Valley, both scored a touchdown against CD East.
Pretty cool.
Last week. Mom said, "Hey, can you give my kids a shout out?" So we'll give them a little shout out because CD East is not a bad football team. Lance Bean and those guys.
I feel like he's a kid too that it's kind of in almost that. Listen, he's not Elias Koch, but in terms of the stat line, probably doesn't reflect how good he's a really solid wide receiver. That they've just kind of missed on a couple big plays to him. I imagine he's going to have. I imagine his second half stats are going to look a lot different than his first half stats.
Yeah, they've been trying to get quarterback figured out, and you're right. I mean, I watched their game, and I told you that spring forward, or one of the other games I watched too, they missed on a couple plays that were just probably 3 or 4 yards off, and if they would have hit, they might have been big plays for them. So, we'll see how they got their first win. Cumberland Valley, we usually don't get as far in the season before we say Cumberland Valley's won a football game, but they did beat CD East in overtime. Both of those kids scored a touchdown. So shout out to them. Mom requested it. If you guys ever have a question for us that you want us to answer on the podcast or something you want us to address or even shout outs, we'll do those on occasion here on the podcast. We can't do 100 shout outs in print.
Yeah.
So don't be asking us to just write a specific shout out. That's not what we do. We're journalists. But here, this is just, a free thing. So we're more than happy to give those kids a shout out because they had a good game Friday. So, hey, you know what? We brought up Lance Dean. You brought up a certain guy from Harrisburg. Micah Parsons has had a big week. He was the NFC Defensive Player of the Week. His stat line, Dan. Did you see his stat line, Dan?
No, I did not see his stat line. I just watched the game. Kind of
seeing me type. We got this new thing. By the way, give us a like on YouTube. Follow us. We have really good numbers on other platforms. We have a great sponsor in UPMC. I look at some of the other podcasts out there. They don't get great YouTube viewer numbers. Watch us. Give us some love on YouTube. Now that we're posting this out there, and you get to see my ugly mug, out of shape, 3-4 nose tackle, got to come out of the game.
Well, I hope they move 36 minutes into our podcast.
Live from the basement. But I'm pulling up this Micah Parsons deal, Dan, and I watched. A lot of people don't know Micah's a big guy on Twitch now. So after the games, he doesn't go out. You don't see him in the club or anything like that. Old school Dallas, when they were winning Super Bowls, those guys got into some stuff, man. You can hear Michael Irvin and stuff talk about that. Micah, where was he at an hour after the Jets game? He was on Twitch in his home. He's got this new room that he had swagged out for gaming, and he's running a NBA 2K basketball game with other Cowboys playing alongside him in there. So, and he actually joked, his goal is to get the Super Bowl this year, get 3 sacks, get in on offense, score a touchdown, and then retire. And it's funny. He was joking because I don't think he has any plans to retire. He really does. He talks about being the greatest, but damn, he had 9 quarterback pressures, 7 quarterback hits, 4 tackles, 3 for loss, 2 sacks, pass breakup, forced fumble recovery, and he ran that one in, but he got called this touchdown. That he was actually touchdown when he recovered it. He was everywhere, Dan. He is unbelievable.
Well, I was listening to I think it was maybe the Bill Simmons podcast, one of the big, podcast. They were talking about Micah and kind of debating, who's he the best, who's at least like the most, explosive. Because there's some really good, kind of not sexy defensive players that kind of, in the middle, and linebackers that kind of run the defenses and everything that don't do the same things. But in terms of just game wrecking, I mean, we haven't really seen a guy like this since. I think the debate was pretty much, would you say Lawrence Taylor or Reggie White? It's pretty much one of those two guys, because it feels like Reggie White kind of has people kind of don't really talk about him anymore as one of those guys, but he was one of those guys as well. And the fact that that's already in the discussion for Micah Parsons in year 3 in the NFL is I think that tells you all you need to know.
I think he's more versatile than all of those guys. Like Lawrence Taylor was amazing and explosive and just an incremical pass rusher.
Like he was a bull. He was just
Reggie was incredible because I mean Micah actually has that move. You'll see him sometimes just do that like kind of like hip toss.
Yeah, probably watch Reggie White. Probably watch Reggie White and learn how to do it.
Yeah.
That's the type of guy Micah Parsons seems to be. So,
so that's pretty incredible. And then I read this week, and I even tweeted it like 3 weeks ago, that he's also a top 5 running back in the NFL. I think I said it on this podcast because I watched him in high school. Okay. And everybody knows it kind of went viral over the last couple of weeks. Clips of him running the football in high school. I think it kind of happened around this NFL Origins thing that NFL Plus did on him, where they had a bunch of those clips. But he was an incredible running back in high school. And I really do think that he could go play running back and be elite, even though that's a not very well protected position or paid position. And
I don't think Dallas wants to see what happened to Nick Chubb happen to Micah.
Von Miller and Stephon Diggs actually just predicted that Micah was going to get a 40-piece in his contract coming up, which is $40 million a year, which ESPN was predicting $32 million a year. It's going to be the highest paid defensive player ever. But this week, Dan, Micah spilled the tea, his exact words, on Pat McAfee, that they've been getting him some practice reps at tight end.
I mean, I'll choose to believe it when I see it, not because
Mike McCarthy said that he wasn't very happy with the route that he ran, but he thinks he can do it, so he's doing it.
But I mean, here's my thing. That just feels like something that you throw out there to kind of scare. I just can't imagine you risk Micah Parsons getting injured on it. You're never coaching again if that happens.
I'm going to tell you what it is.
I mean, I'm a Patriots fan. I watched Mike Vrabel do this at
Micah Parsons is ultra competitive. Okay, yeah. He likes the challenge of being able to show that he can be an explosive offensive player too. He's got a busy mind, so he stays going after these things. And when Micah puts in his mind that he wants to do something, he's not gonna. I have no indication that what I'm telling you is true other than my personal experiences with him. And when Micah tells you he wants to do something and he gets in his mind he's going to do something, that's one of the reasons he's so successful. He doesn't stop. There's a drive there to get it done. So just like James Franklin was playing around and maybe let him return some kicks, I'm sure he was getting pestered by Micah left and right to let him get in there. I'm sure Mike McCarthy is. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not thinking midfield stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me to see some red zone stuff where they try to run like a play action pass and dump him off and get him an offensive touchdown or whatever.
I can't imagine there will be any play to Micah Parsons with him in the open field. I think what it would be is
it won't be.
It would be how they use Mike Vrabel when he was on the Patriots.
Yeah. That's where I can see now. I think Micah Parsons again.
He could, but it's not worth the risk.
Yeah, but you don't want to have the greatest defensive player in the game get hurt catching a pass when you've got other guys who can do that well enough to get you down the field.
Yeah.
So it's Micah Parsons' season, my man. Guys, you gotta realize what's so fascinating about him is this kid literally 3 years ago, we were walking down Jefferson Street with him talking about what might be. Okay. And having covered him and seen his growth as a person to now when we turn on our Sunday ticket, every commercial, Dan, Sunday was Micah Parsons. Every commercial break start off on Micah Parsons knocking at the door with the bag of Tostitos.
Yeah.
He's a star. He's a mega star, and good Lord, he's getting it done. So that's the Micah Parsons segment of our now weekly podcast. We're gonna have a Micah Parsons segment every week.
What I was going to say too is, I mean, it's cool in general because you have Micah Parsons kind of at the front and center of the NFL, and then last night, I mean, you have another Mid-Penn superstar and Alyssa Thomas, who, if we're talking about crazy stat lines, Alyssa Thomas puts up crazy stat line after crazy stat line in WNBA to send, I think, the Sun to their 5th straight conference final. She had 28, 6, and 12, only 2 turnovers and a 15-point win. I mean, she's going to be first. I think she might have already been named first team all WNBA because I remember there was a ton of uproar when she wasn't starting the All-Star game because she's not exactly the flashiest player in the league, but
it was third in MVP voting.
Yeah, she averaged 16, 10, and 8.
10 seasons ends. And look, it's not football, but we don't really have a all sports podcast, so we should bring her up because she's legendary here, not just in Central Pennsylvania, but for Pennsylvania. We just had, again, third in MVP voting with her 10th season in the league, and she set all kind of records. So,
the Mid-Penn is done. Yeah. It doesn't even count. We can't even count Christian Pulisic because he never went to high school here. But I mean, Central PA is producing some of the best players in pretty much. They just need Benny Montgomery to start swinging a little better in the minors, and you'll have you might have
all right. Last time I watched, and you know what, Beck Way was I think getting back on track. He got knocked around a little bit this year, Cumberland Valley pitcher, but he got back on track a little bit. And you look at the pros. Looks like Chase Edmonds got worked in a little bit for the Cowboys this week.
Bill Davis have a fight booked. That's all we need.
Chase Edmonds, CD East,
yeah,
which Jared Porter just broke his school record for touchdowns in the game with 6 2 weeks ago. But and then Bryce Hall, we talked about him with the Jets, and then Zach Kuntz. So a lot of Central PA guys. And then you got some guy named Eric Donald out west. So we'll keep an eye on the pros too. DeAndre Swift. They freed DeAndre. They let him go, Dan. 120. I started him at the 3-yard week. DeAndre, I started you because of the state championship game where I interviewed you afterwards after you scored all those touchdowns. And I said, that guy is the best high school running back I've ever covered. Kenneth Gainwell's out. They got to give him the rock. He's going to make it happen. Danny made it happen.
You know who else he was starting for? The Fighting Epplers, my fantasy team in the Advanced Local Fantasy Football League. So
you named your team after Eric Epler.
Yep. I mean, why not? Who else can you name your fantasy football team in the Advanced Local Fantasy Football League after that?
What is your record in the and let's just be honest here, Dan. You're see, now we're going there. You keep carrying us down these rabbit holes in this podcast, Dan. So gotta admit, guys, I give Dan a little bit of grief because I think he's the only sports guy who actually got into the office fantasy football. And I wouldn't say that it is the most hardcore of football fan in that office fantasy football league.
It's won in the second round this year.
And you didn't win last year, Dan. You did not carry the flag for the sports department on to victory.
We're on a better pace this year. We're 1-1. So
who'd you lose to, Dan?
I'm not even sure who I lost. I might not want to even mention who I lost to. So it's okay. We're on the right track. We've got Saquon Barkley out and Joe Burrow as our quarterback. So we're doing fantastic.
Dan, you're gonna owe me 50 laps around the parking lot if you lose this office fantasy football. I
lost to Paul Vigna in week 1, so
you can't lose to Paul, man. Come on.
He's quite good. It's all right. We'll figure it out.
Yep. So let's wrap it up this week. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of good football discussion, but we do need to come back and we need to kind of talk about. Last week we closed it talking about the injuries that happened around the state, significant injuries. in the time since that podcast, Max Engle has passed away. The Jersey Shore football player who got injured, and it was a head injury. We were able to report. They played a game Monday, a very emotional thing for that community. This is a nightmare for a journalist to have to cover. It's a nightmare for a parent to have to go through. And again, I just say what we said last week, Dan. I think, whatever you guys do, if you pray, if you just send out good vibes or whatever, continue to do that for that family. Because it's an awful thing. And it's heartbreaking and it's terrible. It's inspirational to see those young men pick themselves up the way they did and the community to rally the way it did. When I got cancer, I talked about finding blessings in the curse and the curse of cancer. But then you find out who loves you and stuff like that. And you never want to see a young man get lost, lose a young man's life, but to also see the beauty in the community and the young men who were his friends pick themselves up. That's something. It's a blessing that they were able to do that and find that strength. So again, our thoughts and prayers to them. And I wanted to say too, Dan, and I'll let you kind of chime in with any thoughts you have there, but I wanted to say too, yesterday, there's another young man who's still battling for his life, Mason Martin, that quarterback from Karn City, who collapsed during his team's game against Red Bank Valley on September the 1st. His mom, through their football account, shared an update from his mom and dad yesterday. More promising. Apparently, he really had some touch and go situations from the statement last week, but now doctors are thinking, maybe there's a chance that this kid can come back, and so they've asked for continued prayers there. Good thoughts, and let's keep those coming because that kid's battling, and again, the latest update is that he might have a chance to come back, so that's great news. And we didn't have any big injuries last week that I'm aware of, Dan. So that's also great news. But this was difficult. Any thoughts about any of this stuff that we've had to watch as journalists? And luckily, it's somewhat from afar for us. We're not directly covering Jersey Shore, but it's heartbreaking too.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's just no real. There's not much to say other than it's just you see that news come through the wire and it just makes you kind of take stock of everything. I mean, you don't even want to say silver lining because it's not a silver lining. But I mean, there is something to seeing how much these kids kind of mean to the community, and you kind of wish the kids. It kind of makes you wish that these kids could see what they mean to the community while before they go through these things. But I think it just goes to show how important that stuff is and how important it is to kind of take stock of these things before these issues happen too. So yeah, I don't have much more to say.
One of the things I love about sports, Dan, is I've in a lot of ways I feel like I've lost faith in the country. I feel like adults on both sides of the political aisle are necessarily not being leaders, and there's a trickle down there and all across in every aspect of our life. I don't think we have enough leadership, and I sometimes lose faith. And then covering sports, I get to see these young kids who are coming out of conditions they probably shouldn't be faced with, in their neighborhoods and stuff like that, and beating odds and doing great things despite that, and in a tragedy like this, you look at that group of young men and that community and the strength that they showed, and it gives you hope. In covering sports, seeing the resiliency and the strength of some of these young kids, because I'm not sure I could handle that if it was that close to me in the same way. So, Jersey Shore, we're praying for you. We're sending up good thoughts for you. The same for the the Karn City family, the Mason Martin and his family. We'll have something tomorrow. West Prairie's doing some pretty cool stuff for the show. Their support for Max Engle and for Mason Martin. I'll have that as a lead on one of our pieces on PennLive. So check that out on PennLive.com. Again, prayers up, thoughts up. We'll be back next week with our different segments. We'll let you know who Dan wants to tear apart next week as a former legend, which he's now. Dan, you're not a big wrestling fan, I know, but we're going to call you like Randy Orton. We're going to call you the Legend Killer. So once a week, you're going to come in and just tear down a former high school legend. We're 2 for 2 now since you and I started doing this.
Yeah, I could. What's Ricky Waters up to? Or
Jacobic's going to win you back. Watch this week, North Carolina. What they say? Drake Mays never won a WPIAL title, right?
Yeah, that is true. He is not. Well, if it's not him, it'll be the slinging Christian Veilleux. So,
all right, guys. Until next week, PennLive.com. Check out our work. See you guys next week.